Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be looking at my early thoughts for the 2026 to 2027 winter season, and then at the end I'm going to wrap this all up with some graphics I made in Google Slides. They're really good at getting the point across. Not as good as the graphics I usually make, but you'll like them, hopefully. But a better quality update with the graphics, everything will come later, and then a tropical update hopefully tomorrow with all the recent developments. But without further ado, let's get started. So current observations put the El Nino southern oscillation around 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius above average. So that's around a moderate to strong El Nino. Strong El Nino starts at 1.5 degrees Celsius. We've had some rapid strengthening over the past couple months, and we do expect a peak in November, December with a 3 to 4 degrees Celsius potential peak. Current CPC forecasts, I think, only have it like 2.5, which is very conservative, but everything else puts it above that, and I do expect it to potentially get to even 3 degrees Celsius, which would put it like the second strongest or strongest potentially El Nino ever, which could definitely bring some very significant winter impacts to parts of the country, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, so as you see, even some ensembles 4 to 4.5 degrees Celsius above, and if we go here, we do see that pretty much throughout the entire winter time into the springtime, we do have pretty much guaranteed El Nino probabilities. And even if we go to the Niño plumes for the Niño 3.4 index, which is the area of the Eastern Pacific we measure for the El Nino southern oscillation and the forecast and everything. Hopefully that made sense. But anyway, we do see December to February throughout winter. I mean, weakening past December, but in that peak we see 3.5 to 4, not really 4, but 3.5 to 3.7 degrees Celsius. This potentially the strongest El Nino ever. These El Nino plumes really going far out, and then even by March, February, we're still well into the very strong El Nino territory, which I think we very well could do. I think that the CPC is being very conservative, but I do think their forecast will go up. And also, just so you know, just interesting thing, depending on how strong El Nino is, in the springtime and terminating El Nino, which means that a weakening or dying El Nino, I guess it just depends. It can be weakening or it can be dying. That shifts severe weather in the spring up towards the Midwest, but we will see what happens with that. That's for another video. Going into the next video, thing, we are looking at the analogs for this winter. Now, this is for the hurricane season, but, you know, the hurricane season analogs, obviously, they're both based off El Nino, the hurricane season and winter analogs. So these are the analogs I'll be using. I looked through them, and they seem very accurate. I will not be using 1987, because if we go to 1987 here, the El Nino wasn't very strong. It didn't even get to moderate stage, while the other ones did. But yeah, as we see a very strong El Nino there. So if we actually go to the analogs, for temperature anomalies, we do see very strong ridging across the northern U.S. Very far. What I mean by that is more northern polar jet. So no troughing as much across the northern U.S. under a typical El Nino pattern, like we see in many of these years. So, you know, especially across the Midwest, very above normal temperatures in the northern U.S., while that very strong El Nino causing very below average temperatures in the southern United States, especially near Texas and into Florida, statewide Florida especially. And if we go into the precipitation anomalies, we do see some West Coast activity as that jet stream, southern jet supercharge comes through, and then especially in Florida and the Gulf Coast, especially, as you can see, and even up towards the Carolinas, that supercharged southern jet bringing tons of rain, and that combined with the below average temperatures could definitely increase snow probability, but also just a rainy, wet, cold winter expected for those regions under these analogs. If we go to the Climate Prediction Center forecast, we do see that here. I mean, they're not as on board with the temperature forecast, but for the below average areas, but for the above average areas, they do agree above average temperatures across most of the all of the northern U.S. And then extremely above average temperatures, precipitation, I mean, across the southern and central United States, especially the southeast. We see Florida and the Carolinas, especially Florida there. Now again, this El Nino could be very strong, historical, so that southern jet is going to be especially far south and supercharged, but especially being far south, it could be in the Gulf, really. So I will let you know what the significance of it being farther south than a usual El Nino is in a bit. If we go to the height anomalies for on the climatology models, we look in December. We do see that strong southern jet plowing through the southern United States, and the European model certainly shows it extremely strong. So that's definitely going to bring rainier and colder weather to the southern United States, and even some severe weather as you get towards later in the winter. Well, actually, it's really a threat throughout the entire winter, but especially later in the winter as you get closer to spring. But, depending on how far south that jet is, that could potentially limit the amount of severe weather, especially with a very strong El Nino. I'll say this. For like North Florida, Georgia, and areas, they get a winter severe weather threat no matter what. But that could, and while it could be limited by a very strong El Nino, though, because the southern jet could be south of those areas, and what it does is it keeps the warm sector south of those areas. So the peninsula gets tons of severe weather in an El Nino, but areas above that don't get much. But though I will say, again, Florida, Georgia, they have a pretty similar risk no matter the ENSO phase. They're not as affected, though the Florida Peninsula could definitely be seeing a lot. But now, enough of the severe weather. If we go into the precipitation and we go to November, December, we do see that supercharged southern jet, especially with those high precipitation anomalies across Florida into January and February and December. And especially over the peninsula, like I said, that jet is going to be pretty far south. But again, the whole area is going to be experiencing above average temperatures because, again, there's also the cold and cool sectors above and to the left or to the west of the warm front, which so you don't need to be south of the southern jet to really receive the cold temperatures or the above average precipitation. That's really just for the severe weather. And then, of course, you see on the west coast where that jet comes in, you see very above average precipitation in California. So very rainy, and then in the higher elevations in the southern U.S., very snowy. So this is also going to create an increased flooding threat. Actually, the National Weather Service in Tallahassee, I don't have it pulled up, but they showed that during El Nino years, Florida and the Gulf Coast especially Florida though, gets a lot of river flood warnings. So a lot more flash flooding in the winter. So that's precipitation. Not only is going to do very gloomy days, because, in winter you tend to get nimbostratus clouds, which is like that constant rain. So very gloomy days, very rainy weather and cold weather. But also flooding is going to be a risk, and on top of the flooding, severe weather for the more southerly areas. And if we go to the temperature anomalies, we do see, again, above average temperatures across the northern U.S. due to that northern polar jet, and then below average temperatures in the plains and southern United States. And if we go back to pressure here, we're going to entertain the CFS for a second. Very interesting what they're showing. Wait. Oh, wait, I need to go to the control. Oh, wait, no, wrong one. Sorry, I was confused for a second. But yeah, they just show hell, I guess, just an insane jet. This is fantasy land, at least in the jet terms. In terms of, like, precipitation, the very southerly jet stream, and especially a lot of rain on the west coast, southwest coast, so that's consistent with an El Nino. And then if we go into the temperature forecasts, it's the same situation. Cold air, especially, though, in the southeast there. And then they just show, like, some crazy negative NAO, positive. Not even a positive PNA. This is just a negative NAO. Cold air blasting through the United States, very... you get, the ridging over the Canada is a negative AO, negative NAO, which allows that cold air to blast into the United States. So this is definitely an outlier. If you go back to the European model, this is just crazy. But, anything could happen, but it's very unlikely. The CFS is just showing some crazy signal. It is not a negative PNA, which I'll get to what that is later in the video, because there is colder air over the western Canada, which is not characteristic of that. But this is definitely a more extreme negative NAO setup. This is very fantasy land, and I would not trust the CFS, especially because the European seasonal is more accurate, and we see more realistic scenarios there. And if we go to CAN-SIPs too, again, they're not really showing much of that. They do show a positive PNA negative NAO situation. Actually, that's actually what CanSib shows because of ridging and higher temperatures over Western Canada, and then those below average temperatures are able to make it into the plains and the southern U.S., of course, because of the jet stream. And so this could be a scenario where now, obviously, the precipitation is going to be mainly confined to the southeastern and southern United States, California to Florida, but those below average temperatures could be nationwide. So that's what the CanSibs really shows. But I'm really leaning more towards the European model, which that a supercharged southerly jet stream is going to focus the cold and the rain on the southern United States. And anyway, if we go to the PNA, it's a teleconnection. We cannot forecast it this far out. Not even close. If you watch a winter weather video around now that says positive PNA, negative PNA, bullcrap. El Niños are typically associated with positive PNAs, but doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's impossible to forecast, and they can switch from positive to negative on a weekly, daily basis. Though, positive PNAs favor, this is what the CanSibs was showing, positive PNAs favor lower pressure across the eastern U.S., ridging on the western Canada region, lower pressure in the Gulf of Alaska that favors cold outbreaks into the U.S. And we saw that in pretty much all of our analogs. I mean, let's go to 1997, 1998, slightly positive. We go 2015 to 2016, very positive. We go 1964 to 1965, slightly negative, so more neutral there, but, you know, for 1982, 1983, very positive. So definitely could be seeing some cold outbreaks across the central and eastern U.S. in addition to those colder air due to the southerly jet stream across the southern United States, subtropical jet stream. And we'll see more of this explained in the later in the video. And negative NAO, like I said, that's what the CanSibs was going crazy about. This seems more like a La Nina setup, obviously, because they don't really show a southerly jet stream here. But just know that negative NAO, higher pressure across the Arctic, causes cold air to blast into the U.S. and vice versa for positive, where hotter air is more south. Now, obviously, this is not at all what we're seeing. We're definitely more likely to see a negative NAO, especially because of that southerly jet stream. Which is not at all what we see, the positive NAO situation here. So, again, it could be negative or positive NAO this winter. We can't predict it this far out, but the CFS and CanSib certainly seem to see we could have a situation like this. Though, I wouldn't bet on it, because as you see in a bit, we're going to see in a bit, well, we had some interesting setups in some of our analogs where we did have Arctic air blast through the U.S., but we did not have higher pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, which would mean it's not exactly a negative NAO. But we do see negative NAO again, colder air in the southern U.S., which is why we see that usually in El Niños. But we'll get to that in a second. So first analog, 1983, we do see colder air in the Gulf of Alaska, much lower pressure is what I mean. And you can see that is not at all associated with a negative NAO. But even then, and we had high ridging over the around Canada. So the colder air, as you can see, is much more north in the Arctic here. So this was definitely more of a neutral to positive. Probably not positive because cold air is still getting far south, but definitely a more neutral NAO because there's no cold air outbreaks across the central United States. And if we go to our PNA thing here, we can see this is definitely a positive PNA because while we do have higher pressure in the eastern Canada, we do tend to have higher pressure in that area. As you can see here, off the coast of Canada in a positive PNA phase in that example, we have higher pressure. And that's the same here. But the reason it's still a positive PNA is due to that lower pressure in the Gulf of Alaska and the lack of high pressure across most of the U.S. So this could still favor cold outbreaks and big winter storms in, say, the mid-Atlantic, which we definitely do see in El Niños a lot, nor'easters, and then, of course, very heavy rains across the southern U.S. due to that southerly jet stream. And, for example, we had a blizzard, I think, in February of 1983, is a perfect example of this. So the more average El Niño here, but definitely leaves room for more outbreaks in the mid-Atlantic. This is definitely a more of a positive PNA, negative NAO thing. Because again, positive PNA because of that cold Arctic, lower Arctic Bay of Alaska air, and colder temperatures, and negative NAO because while it doesn't seem like some crazy Arctic air outflow, again, this is not really this year because this is kind of assuming it's a La Nina, it looks like, but we do still see Arctic air able to escape and higher pressure across the Arctic, unlike here where it was more colder air. The higher pressure air and the warmer air is more widespread across the Arctic. So this is definitely more of a negative NAO situation, and so definitely this could also leave room for colder air blasts and winter storms more north. And actually, in this year, we definitely did see a big tornado outbreak in Florida, the Florida Peninsula, not the Panhandle. So, and a very wet year overall. So this is definitely very similar to what we'll be seeing this year. And why, even though we're seeing a very southerly jet, places like the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast could definitely be still seeing an active winter. This is one of the most interesting years, January 2010. We had a positive PNA and a negative NAO. That negative NAO looks a little weird here, but the reason it's a negative NAO is because positive NAOs have all this cold Arctic air up here, while negative NAOs have all the high pressure in the Arctic. So very interesting, but the cold air outbreak is occurring more west, but it's still negative NAO, positive PNA. Just looks a little weird, but very active southerly jet stream. And this again is going to cause tons of rain across the southern United States. So just more rainy days, rainy cold winter, and also flooding risks in addition to all of that. But also again, because the cold air is able to get throughout the eastern U.S. more, and the Arctic air, the higher pressure air is more contained in the Arctic, and the Arctic Circle is more unstable, the Arctic Oscillation. That causes more potential for snowstorms more north, and this is a perfect example of this in 2010, where we saw this major outbreak. This is not outbreak, snowstorm, sorry, I'm using tornado terminology, over the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. By the way, when I was talking about that, I was talking about this map. As you can see, cold air across the U.S. And warm air contained in the Arctic Circle. I think it was lagging out and it was showing the 1998 map still, but it was talking about 2010. We do see that due to that, again, strong El Nino, we did, or it wasn't as strong this year, but they were still in El Nino. Snowstorms were still able to get very south. So in addition to very rainy, cold winter, it's just very rainy, as typical by El Ninos, and even flooding, we did see snow due to that El Nino. But also, much snow outbreaks, as you can see across the Mid-Atlantic, snowstorms due to that strong negative NAO and cold air able to reach across the eastern U.S. Now, again, this is a gamble. We do not know if it's going to be a negative NAO, a positive NAO, positive PNA, negative PNA, but I'm showing you the potential scenarios for this winter. But as of right now, if we're going off of a typical El Nino, that the northern U.S. is going to be much drier. These are just potential scenarios on why it might not be that simple. But this is not exact a forecast. This is potential thoughts. But, very snowy winter up there. And then if we see here, this is weirder, but this is a strong El Nino, strong southerly jet, even if it's hard to see here. But the Arctic negative, if we go to the NAO here 2016, yeah, this was more neutral for January, and as you can see that here, because there is hot air in all in the Arctic, but there isn't major troughing down here. But even then, there is still enough troughing, and the Arctic Circle is clearly not positive. It's not where snowstorms can still get through, and we still see that in 2015. We do see some major snowstorms in the Mid-Atlantic. But this is just another example of why this NAO thing is inconsistent. So again, all this has just been potential scenarios. So now it's time to get to my forecast. So again, I'm not betting on the NAO PNA thing. So I'm expecting above average temperatures across the U.S., especially in the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest, and I'm a little less certain, again, due to the scenarios I just showed you in the Northeast, so I'm giving that less of a severity, so only slightly above average temperatures there, and then much below average temperatures, especially in the Gulf Coast and Florida due to that strong southerly jet stream. Again, that El Nino jet is going to amplify tons of precipitation across the southern United States, and I meant to, this thing is lagging out here, but we're just going to fix that real quick, and we're going to do this. But there we go. Yeah, so the southerly jet stream is going to cause much heavier precipitation across southern United States, especially as we saw in those models. It definitely picks up as you get towards Florida, and then obviously up in the mountains. But so that's why we have these high contours in Florida and the Gulf Coast. The reason they're not up in California is because they're mainly just for the mountains. And again, this is just drawing on a map, putting it all together for y'all. I'll definitely have better graphics in a later video. But yeah, definitely very rainy weather, even up into the Northeast, because El Niños can still cause that, especially with the scenarios I just showed you. But definitely the northern U.S., Midwest, Pacific Northwest, below average precipitation. Snowfall. Again, we didn't, obviously, the northern United States got tons of snow, as we see in these analogs, but that's just because they always do. Nothing, still, I mean, look up here. I mean, only 6 inches to 1 foot of snow in these areas, which is crazy. So definitely below average snow in those areas. Above average snow chances in the southern U.S. and the mountains. Again, this is lagging out. I don't know why I was doing that, but there we go. And especially in Florida, due to, again, we saw in the climatology models in the southern jet, that's going to, the very above average precipitation and much colder temperatures in the consensus of climatology models creates a much higher chance of snow in the southeast, especially the Gulf Coast and Florida. And then again, this is a complete wild card because this could be very below average, as we saw in, like, here. Not here. Here, because very above average temperatures, and like look at the climatology, the climate prediction centers forecast. But then again, you see where in some of these analogs we had negative NAOs and positive PNAs causing mid-Atlantic snow outbreaks in a lot of these. So that's just a wild card. And this is my overall. So peninsula, severe weather, Southern California all the way, especially through Florida and the Gulf Coast. Very rainy winter, so rainy, colder. Flooding is also a much higher threat. And then, of course, more north where the colder temperatures are, very snowy due to that southern jet. Snowy in the mountains, California, very below average or below average snow and rain. And warmer temperatures in the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest. And that's definitely, definitely going to limit the snow y'all get. But also, in case we get a positive, whether we get a positive or negative NAO, the cold air outbreaks are very prone to this northern region near the Arctic, more near the Arctic. I'm not saying y'all are in the Arctic, you're not. But yeah, and then again, Northeast, the wild card. It just depends on the NAO phase and PNA phase, which we will not know for a very long time. And then finally, I just want to show you, so this is like the jet stream, the southern jet stream, and I just want to show you specifically on the Gulf Coast, as these low pressure systems move through, again, we're going to see a lot of snow behind the cold, or a lot of colder air. This is too far south for tons of snow. I mean, unless we get like an early 2025 setup, but again, colder air and wet air above the warm front, and cold air behind the cold front. Though in here it's just a warm sector, and depending on this positioning, this is going to determine where the bullseye of the severe weather is, though almost certainly it's going to be on the peninsula because it's an El Nino. This area up here pretty much gets a similar amount either way. But either way, the cold air and high precipitation are going to go much outside of this area. This is just like an example system. This was just to show you like the warm sector, which is in between this cold front and warm front, to show where the peak of the severe weather could be in the Florida peninsula. But anyway, y'all, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully I'll have a tropical video tomorrow. Leave any comments y'all have, and actually I'm premiering this video the day after I make it, so the tropical video actually is today probably, but it might be tomorrow, August 12th, but we'll see. It might be also August 11th, because again, I'm premiering this the day after, I just realized. But anyway, y'all, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave any comments, please leave a like and subscribe, and have a great day, y'all. Good night.